3 contributions, but 4 contributors. The Czech team will consist of 2 people. Let me welcome Lukáš Jiříčka, who studied contemporary comparative studies at the Charles University and dramaturgy here at the Academy of Performing Arts. He works as an editor, theater and film dramaturg, director of radio plays, and he lectures dramaturgy, radio art and music here at the Academy of Performing Arts, but also at the Film Academy and Janáček's Academy in Brno. And his colleague, who is not going to speak, but he will be present for the discussion, is Tomáš Procházka over there, who studied Academy of Performing Arts, Department of Alternative and Puppet Theatre, and since then he worked as a freelancer artist, as a performer, puppeteer, musician, sound designer, technician, and visual artist. So, Lukáš, it's yours.
Hello, so I will read our text, which we wrote together with Tomáš. The title is Theatre as an Open Forum. This title is somehow inspired by, let's say, Polish movement from 60s or 70s, people like Oskar Hansen, or people who are related to Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw. Yes, so let's start. In some of the short prose works of the American horror classic Howard Phillips Lovecraft, he describes fictional Miskatonic University. It is famous for its collection of occult books, and its non-existent library even contains a non-existent Necronomicon book. We choose to use the name of this fictional educational institution for our degree program, which we are doing with our first year students at DAMCALT. The Miskatonic University was created only by imagination, and that is also the ability we are trying to cultivate the most in our program. We also use the ironic subtitle Art Through for our program. However, we, 4 teachers responsible for this program, are not the only scientists to explore the entirely explored phenomenon, which is the theater, but also related artistic disciplines, methods, and struggles of various artistic components and phenomena. The students are as well. The movement that is going on in the contemporary theater, as well as the visions of the future theater, are these fluid and constantly changing phenomena, which one always strives to rationalize, describe, and define, so that their power and unpredictability become obtrusive by discursive practice. We are at the Department of Alternative Theatre, which aims to explore, redefine, subvertly attack the heterogeneous organism we call the theatre. Instead of exploring the dramatic theatre, we try to find the drama itself in areas of conflict, friction, or disagreement with other territories, both artistic and scientific, for example. Far more than the theatre, the individual lectures, workshops, and practical lessons touch other areas like botany, Egyptian magic, literary Biedermeier, free improvisation in music, art breath, and outsider art. Workshops focus or will focus on improvisation on Buto dance, extended voice techniques, experimental choir, writing and sampling, poetry of the everyday, sound editing or work with super 8mm camera, puppets or baroque music, radio composition. These overlapping areas can more radicalize or update the theatrical language, perhaps even more than watching the current movements in the theater and all its developing trends. We try to disrupt or simply ignore the classical hierarchy within the Miskatonic University. Even though we have students of acting, stage design and directing dramaturgy. This means that all students have access to experience from all professions, that everyone goes through physical, poetry or voice workshops, regardless of their focus. That is how they learn the creative potential through the development of their own experience through the second discipline. the possibility of changing their own focus, but mainly the openness to the input of their own sensitivity, experience, aesthetics into the apparently determined or studied profession. So far, this practice bears fruit. Similarly, as in bands, like the rock bands, or smaller theater communities, the hierarchy of functions, the approach of an individual to his or her own profession is not solved. The signature of an individual is cancelled and, on the contrary, offers the possibility of collective energy, collective inspiration, negotiation, and searching for aesthetics. Of course, it also has its political consequences, but no one forbids students to do solo projects or create smaller work units. On the contrary, a scenographer can bring a stronger text than the director. The director may be a better performer in some projects than the actor, and the actor can have an excellent musical or scenographical contribution. We know it from our own practice. We do not care about perfect shapes or designs. Design hurts, doesn't contradict, glides over the surface. We give space to open and unfinished structures and situations. Another important point of this work is an attempt to get acquainted with older, abandoned, or for example, non-European aesthetics and poetics. In the Baroque or Romantic theater, legends or rituals often had very productive aesthetics, often much more modern or more radical than a considerable part of contemporary theater work. In the work of an actor or performer, in the perception of time, the function of a scenic object. Old may be newer than what we consider to be new. The group as an organism, where everyone has the same powers, like in a musical group and perhaps more precisely, in a group working with the principles of free improvisation. But not improvisation as a just show of own master skills, but as opening up the situation, listening to the other, instantaneous space to react and redefine your own habits. The slow development of dramaturgical structures is naturally not ignored here, but quick and spontaneous, wild and uncrowned work refines the imagination and readiness of all senses. Through dialogue, new forms are born more often than through long and lonely preparation. It is only necessary to stay open, overcoming one's paradigm, aesthetic canon, or clearly established political conviction. Absolute freedom in pedagogy or learning is often rather destructive. It is better to work with formal or conceptual or structural formulas, constraints, obstacles. Parasiting on existing works and shapes is also working, but rather in the position of someone who subjectively subdues, deconstructs, or uses a methods of plunderphonic. Everything that is available can be used. It is necessary to seek new legitimacy, to perceive its work in a chain of other works. It is necessary to learn the strategy of using the works of others. In our case, experiences from musical practice, applications of musical practices and aesthetics to the theatrical framework, visual code translated to the form of a score or environment. These practices serve us better than dramatic texts. And the last page. The absolute respect of makes sense if these works are serious and bearable to us, but if it deconstructs them strongly as our own material. We learn to incorporate works of the other artists into new theatrical frames and compositions, into another building with respect to the material. We learn to perceive their construction and effectiveness and how to adapt them into new dramaturgical structures and systems or frames. Collage, plunderphony, mashup, and kata are in this case not just terms of deconstructive process, deconstructive poetics, but also principle how to perceive world in more heterogenic and deconstructive way. It is statement or rather attitude how to deal with chaos. Not always we ask for complex and sophisticated work. Fast, spontaneous works, punk, DIY, art grid, have a special power for their position beyond the fully explored and calculated art. Imperfection is a new perfection. It makes sense to solder together, cook together, go for excursions, learn editing and music programs. Sharing the experiences is sharing the aesthetics and approaches. Cooking itself is a good school of theater, composition and dramaturgy. And all of these events bring an extra experience, a full stomach and a lot of sympathy. With the debates about the theater, it sometimes pays to do a bit of drift, perhaps listening to Captain Beefheart, a noise concert or a collection of minerals will teach us more about the theater than seeing the new contemporary theater productions. And last few words are by a Czech filmmaker who inspires us a lot. It's a quote of his decalogue about the art or about the principle how he's working with art. He describes film, but instead of film you can imagine theater or some other artistic practices. Remember, there is only one form of poetry. The opposite of poetry is professional expertise. Before you start making a film, theater, write a poem, paint a picture, create a collage, write a novel, essay, etc. Only by cultivating your ability for universal expression will you ensure you will produce a good film. Thank you.
I would like to welcome Carmen Mara Ilay, who is a professor of acting in Ostfold University College and in Norwegian Theatre Academy, and she collaborates internationally on theatre and performance work as a performer, dramaturg and designer maker. So, thank you.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for their contributions, and to come at the end of the panel is really a privilege because we get the opportunity to have digested a little bit of what's been shared and in a way kind of respond to that and what we choose to add at the end. It's been really inspiring to see how many things we all have in common and sort of are approaching questions and debates from different perspectives, but it's also very confirming that we have anxieties around a lot of similar experiences. And before I begin with sort of the presentation or structure of the Academy and a little bit of my perspective on that, I want to create a space for a radical tenderness manifesto. And I want to read an excerpt from a text by Danny Danila, who's a performance artist associated with La Cosa Nostra, Teatro Maschile. And I just want to put this into the room before I begin. Radical tenderness is... Go ahead, the mic.
Yes.
How's that? Radical tenderness is to be critical and loving at the same time. Radical tenderness is to understand how to use strength as a caress. Radical tenderness is to know how to accompany one another among friends and lovers at different distances and speeds. Radical tenderness is to know how to say no, is to carry the weight of another body as if it were your own, is to share sweat with a stranger. Radical tenderness is to dance among dissident bodies and workshop, to be completely overwhelmed and maintain our smiles and celebrations. Radical tenderness is to allow yourself to be seen, to allow yourself to be taken. Radical tenderness is to not collapse in the face of our contradictions. Radical tenderness is to not allow our existential demons to become permanent cynicism. It is to not always be the same. Radical tenderness is to not be afraid of fear. Radical tenderness is to live ephemeral love, to invent other temporalities, to embrace fragility. Radical tenderness is to confront others' neuroses with creativity. Radical tenderness is to embody performative gestures that you would normally reject. Radical tenderness is to assume leadership when your community asks it of you, although you may not know what to do or how to do it. And that's where I will end the reading of that. There's much more. I would encourage you to look it up. Radical Tenderness Manifesto. You can read on.
Written by
Dani Damila. And I end there at the moment where she mentions leadership and sort of resistance to leadership, because I come to this conference as a leader of an education together with my colleague Serge Von Arx, who's here, and some other colleagues actually from the Academy. And the structure of the Academy is such that we are a three-part leadership. We call ourselves a theater academy, but what we are doing is really expanding that notion. And that begins with that we are, in our three-part leadership, we are a leader for acting and performance, an artistic director for scenography, and also an administrative director. And in that dialogue, in that three-way leadership, we are already taking on this disagreement, debate, conflict, and different generational experiences, different cultural backgrounds into how we understand our identity as an education. We're located in the south of Norway, in a little town called Fredrikstad, which is on a river, a very beautiful little river, and a traditionally sort of working class farming and fishing community and shipbuilding town. And it's part of the periphery of the theater educational context in Norway, where Oslo would be considered the center and Bergen the kind of other center. And that's an important part of our history. I won't go into all of that now, but it's being on the periphery in relation to central institutions as a kind of dialogue with the center, and a dance, I would say, not only a kind of opposition of the center, but really a dance with it. We kind of continually reform our understanding of what our Norwegian context is and what our international context is. The education is an English language-based program because we are international. It's students, about 35 students from all over the world apply and come to study with us. And of those are BA, MA, and research fellows. And we are both acting and scenography, or acting and performance now, and scenography in those programs. And the way in which we imagine the perspective on that education is that those departments are mutually dependent. So interdependency is a big part of our understanding of the work. It's not about interdisciplinarity, because as we've talked about already, this is sort of a given in the practice, but that we're looking at interdependency and questions of collectivity, and also expanding the practices that we encounter. So the idea of the actor, which is sort of what I'm dealing with in my department, is something that I immediately question when students enter the program in the BA level. It's a question of immediately sort of destabilizing what the actor is and how we understand that in relationship to training. A little bit more about the Academy before I go on. As I mentioned, it's an international group, and the education is curated from semester to semester, and we were talking about curation today. We really are practicing that in how we shape the program. There's a kind of madness to that, there's a paranoia, there's a constant responsive agency that you have as leaders in that practice, as well as a collaborative aspect in responding to the students' development and to the field. And a kind of, we have to resist getting greedy and really understand, if I go back to my first words, like how is it that we can open up a space for the radical to happen, but not actually orchestrate it and not actually script it. And we do that partly by inviting in guest artists. So now about 50% of our education is run by bringing in artists from around the field. Some of them are here today, from around the world, who are bringing in their different practices, and we ask them whether they're coming from what could be considered actor training or scenography or film. We're asking them to challenge themselves in their teaching. So we really invite them to come do something they know how to do, but maybe have never done in that way. We want them to also put themselves at risk with our students on a high level of self-reflection. And that's where I could go on to say more about it as a research-based teaching environment. We relate to sort of the artistic research context within the Scandinavian milieu, which some of you might be familiar with, and our research fellows are connected to that. But I don't want to spend a lot of time getting into the structure. I have only 5 minutes left, I'm sure. What I want to do is sort of name here, rather than how we're teaching, why we teach the way we do, or what happens through the teaching. I actually want to name the values that organize the thinking for me as an educator, as a leader, that I'm wrestling with, and how those values, what I see them, what they do is my job is actually to hold, like almost like with strong arms, to create a space for that which I can't or shouldn't make happen, but what I can preserve for the unknown. So in a way, I see that the values I'm working with are for kind of preserving a negative space for unnameable potential undergrounds to emerge, let's say. And part of that is allowing students to dwell together, people coming from all around the world with different political, aesthetic, cultural experiences, and to some extent a little bit different generations even, bringing their questions about performance, about space, about theater, about acting, about body, about presence, all of these things we've been talking about, bringing them to a practice or an education which is mostly aimed at students making their own work and in the independent or free field. And so the primary aim is to put them into contact with different methodologies and help them find their own, but really also give them space to make projects together. So some of the values that we have around that, I would say, begin with the notion of spirit of place. And I think that for me is where I understand the dwelling aspect of the institution as opposed to the institutional agency or agenda or a kind of disciplinary thinking. Those things I kind of try to resist and actually rather see what is the spirit of place that this room becomes because of this group we have right now and all of the worlds they're bringing, and how to, in a way, preserve that space so that it can find its agenda, which is changing constantly. And so part of the skills that the students find in that, of course, is to listen to each other. And we really encourage listening as an important value, not only listening in the ethical sense of attending the other and responding, but actually listening with your whole body to a room. And I would say that just as a note to an actor education, that it's really an interdependency with space that begins the actor training, so that our students know that they, in fact, are collaborating first with the room before anything else. And in fact, the work is maybe only ever about that. Which brings to another value, which I want to name, which is hospitality. And I mean this not only in terms of hosting people who are coming from all around, but being a host to the work. So how is it that if space is our primary agency in the practice, how can we be a host to the work and actually be hosted by the work? So we really encourage students to be occupied by the spaces that they are encountering, and whether it be a historical site or a haunted site, or by a work, or by a text, or by a piece of music. And for that, I would say that maybe there's an aspect of ritual, of dreaming, of magic that I would continue to emphasize as important in the work that we do. And the image, I wanted to have an image here of one example of a student project, which is kind of dark on this screen. This is called Land of the Free. And this is a piece done by Mari Pitkänen, who is a Finnish student who has collaborated with some other students in Trinidad and Tobago. And they observed through walking throughout a month period the wall of this cemetery, which is it's a colonial cemetery from the time of enslaved Africans on the island. And you have quite a lot of burials that have happened there over generations on top of each other. And the students found a way to respond to the wall and its history by, in a way, masking finding a response to becoming part of the space and also bring movement to the space, a very playful thing to do in a culture where street performance is something that the public knows how to read. And the reason I use that as an example is because I would say that failure is a crucial part of our practice and allowing a space for failure. And with that, not only the failure of the work, but the notion that a body is alive and a body will die. And from there, all the work begins. And so to listen not only to the living, but the dead, and hold a space for that which maybe is uncontainable in any other practice than theater. So, thank you.
A director and media artist, co-founder of the Media Ensemble Big Art Group, editor of Contemporary Performance, and curator of the annual Special Effect Festival in New York City.
Thanks. It's called Special Effects because it's a miracle that happens every year. Anyway, I'm going to sit so I can read from my computer with my bad eyesight, and so I can slowly speak, because if I go off script, I'll start talking really fast. Anyway, so I just wanted to show you where this university is. It's in Pittsburgh, which is about 6.5 hours to 8 hours from New York driving, which I do twice a month. I work in a traditional dramatic theater conservatory inside of a computer science and engineering private university called Carnegie Mellon University. The university is somewhat famous for inventing the first emojis. It has a lot of Department of Defense stuff from research from the US, so they have things like the robot snake. It's, you know, all these things are made because they're supposed to help people, so this was used in the Mexico earthquake, but it's going to go somewhere else. And then also these, I keep going the wrong ways, there these lovely swarming drones. So we developed swarming drone technology, which we'll see soon in a war. Also self-driving cars, facial recognition, natural language processing. So you may ask, like, what is the MFA? What is an MFA in directing and contemporary performance doing in a traditional conservatory housed inside of the Death Star? I hope it's embedding, infecting, and multiplying strategies for pointing at, engaging, and negotiating our contemporary experience. The program is free. There are, it's 3 years long. There's 2 fellows a year, and so there's 6 at a time in class. In the MFA, the fellows take classes in both traditional dramatic theater practice, so script analysis, working with actors, styles, new play scripts, and in contemporary performance where they have encounters with materiality, choreography, social engaged art, object theater, advising, generating post-internet strategies. They read and write critically about contemporary performance, and they're introduced to VR, gaming, augmented reality. I teach the contemporary performance, and my colleagues teach the dramatic theater practice and VR, augmented reality, gaming. And also, since it's in this wider research university, they can take classes and engage, collaborate with outside schools in robotics, coding, policy, mathematics, visual arts, etc. The contemporary performance curriculum is based around 4 kinds of engagements. The first is reading and writing critically, so there's theory and criticism readings and discussions for each of the classes. The fellows also write a white paper and publish it as a book focused on current developments in the form and content of the field. This is a pick of last year's book, which is covered social engaged art, immersive performance, choreographic, queer cabaret, and mixed reality. And next year's book is focused on performing futures, performing care, co-presence, embodiment, and post-internet aesthetics. Then there's practice. So there's daily practice inside of classes alongside readings and writings. This is a puppetry class, which was with the guest, Dan Irwin, who's a US puppeteer. Then there is a series of guests. So the students curate a list of guests who invite to the school for workshops, talks and interventions by artists and curators working in the field. This is Richard Maxwell, and it's with some of the fellows and also playwrights. And then also field work. So they spend a semester interning with a company or an artist or an institution, and they also participate in productions. This is a production that I made with a bunch of artists. It's a remake of Carl Stockhausen's Originale of The Kitchen, and so the students you can see are up on in the middle of it, sort of taking part in the sort of professional field. I was asked to get specific, so I thought I'd talk about one class that I guide that's 16 weeks long, which is about a semester. It's called Hybrid Body, Simultaneous Presence. The class starts with 3 proposals to the students. One is reality is broken, which I think we all can agree with. The second one is that image is not a reflection or a representation of something, it's an object with which we participate. We make and interact with many images every day, both voluntarily, sort of with Instagram, selfies, Skype, etc., and then also involuntary with facial recognition, surveillance cameras, street view cars, advertisements, traffic cams. And then the third is that the moving image on stage is powerful both politically, because post-capitalism speaks in images, and when I say post-capitalism, I don't mean after capitalism, I mean in the crisis of capitalism. And also biologically, which is, do y'all know about orienting effect or reflex? It's why when you're in an airport, you cannot stop looking at the stupid TV. It's because animal instincts make us look at anything that moves, because our heartbeats go up, our breath changes, and we have to turn towards it, but we want to leave. So it's not magic, images aren't magic, we actually just physically are afraid of it. The class is about the complex dramaturgy at play when images are introduced into live performance and also when it's reflected into the world. Just tell me if this gets boring, I'm the last one. This is the class structure. It's a population of grad and undergrads, actors, designers, directors, just between 20 and 35 each semester. It's led by a media designer, a scenographer, and myself. It's held in a 15,000 square foot industrial loft that the school has sort of outside of school, off campus. There's method to it in that there's 6 weeks of lecture demonstrations, practice with those things, flash labs where the groups work with the newly introduced skills and tools, feedback sessions, which is based on Liz Lerman, which has a reflection in the Das Arts. There's a lot of sort of, it's like the American version, but not as expansive as Das Arts. Rapid prototyping, which we just call it rapid prototyping because when I tell someone at the university that's what we're doing, they're like, oh, I understand that. So, and then another round of feedback. And that's for 6 weeks, and so it's really regimented, and they're just trying to acquire skills. Then we throw it into chaos where everyone can group as they want. The 15,000 square foot sort of space has rolling walls, rolling screens, projector, it has all this stuff because it's in this research institute. And then they can adapt, break, deny, any of those things. And they play, and it becomes kind of wild. It's interjected with, we stop every 2 weeks, and then everyone goes around and sees process, and then gives feedback. And then the professors will actually step in the middle weeks and just give a little bit of feedback if they need it. It sort of, great. So just quickly, what we go over is stationary cameras, and we sort of break it down like how do we live inside these cameras, what are the basics of these cameras, and the main thing that we start off with, and you'll see what they're doing here, is they're troubling the frame. So the frame is a political tool, and we ask questions, whose frame is it, what's outside the frame, where are you in that frame, what's the visibility of the person, how can you subvert the frame or combine the frames to make sort of cyborgs, right? Embody language of the image, we do shot marks, pan zooms, video puppetry where you have half and half bodies where one person is an arm and another person is the body, another person is the voice, kind of playing and subverting the sort of image manufacturing. We then move on to sort of mobile cameras, going through the same relationships. Then we begin to look at mediated spaces. What does it mean, like literally just breaking it down, because I think we're constantly just making images and just letting them affect us, but like looking at what does it mean when someone stands next to an image, behind an image, through an image, the image on top of them. It's like just simple one day going through, but it sort of breaks down the dramaturgy and builds vocabulary with the students so that we can all kind of continue to talk about the work. Then we talk about, this is much more theatrical, we talk about sort of analog and digital compositing. So this is kind of an analog composite where you have the physical screen and you're looking through the screen and looking at the person inside the screen, and then we move on to, you know, chroma key, luma key, constructing of worlds, fakeness, and then these videos don't work, but here's something they made, which is, this is inside of the 10 weeks. It's, because the actors are dramatic theater actors, they wanted to do Moliere. They did the Miser. And you know, this is like, it's a very sort of theatrical way for these dramatic theater students to sort of think about poetic use of video and more cinematographic. But what's nice about this is that they undermined it at the end. She told them to fuck off, she went downstairs, and then she FaceTimed in to tell them that she was getting an Uber and leaving. So like they began to play with that setup. I think this is us sort of doing video puppetry with a guest artist named David Commander. So using green screen, using actual puppets as the faces of large screens. And that's all I have.